So the first Nintendo Direct in over a year was yesterday. The Zelda community huddled around their screens in anticipation and hope of some Zelda news. And well, Age of Calamity is getting an expansion pass with 2 waves of DLC, and notably, we're finally getting an HD port of the last Zelda game without one. Skyward Sword HD has been announced for release in July. People on the internet had a lot to say about it, like they always do, about the Direct as a whole, but also specifically about Skyward Sword HD. Side note, the Direct yesterday was not bad. We got a new Zelda port, Splatoon 3, Mario Golf, and a spiritual or at least artistic sequel to Octopath Traveler. The only reason you think it's bad is because you are either expecting too much, or you judge Directs solely based on how personally excited you are for the games announced. As a dude with an ear to the Splatoon community, I can assure you there are people who think this is the best Direct in ages. But on to the topic at hand, Skyward Sword HD. You know, it's weird, I had always thought that Skyward Sword HD was a fairly in-demand game. I was certainly always seeing people ask for it, and undoubtedly its announcement did make a lot of people very excited.
I knew it! Yes! It's 60 frames? What?
What is it? Oh my goodness. No way. They actually did it. Oh my goodness. I can't believe it.
While you're all waiting, however, this Legend of Zelda game will be coming to Nintendo Switch. Please take a look.
Is it Skyward Sword? It's Skyward Sword! They brought Skyward Sword! Oh my god, it looks so good! Yes! Oh, thank you! I'm so happy! I'm so happy!
It was kind of shocking to me to see how many people were upset or even angry about the announcement. I guess Nintendo fans are never really happy in general, but it was sort of shocking to see the amount of anger that I did yesterday and even today. I think a fair amount of people are just feeling angry and disappointed that there was no Breath of the Wild 2 news, and they're redirecting that anger towards Skyward Sword since it was the highlight of the Zelda portion of the Direct. Regardless, I'd like to take them at their word and explore whether or not the Skyward Sword HD port really is terrible. So the animosity for the Skyward Sword port seems to come from 3 different areas. First, people say that the port doesn't look that impressive. The graphics barely look different, they barely changed anything or added anything. It's just a lazy port made to make money. The second argument, partially tied to the first, is that the game costs too much. Skyward Sword is selling at full price, and it isn't worth that. The last argument is that Skyward Sword is bad and shouldn't be ported at all, or at least the port should be a collection instead of on its own. Let's deal with the last argument first because I think it's the easiest to deal with, because it's wrong and wholly subjective. I'm sorry that you think Skyward Sword is the worst game, but that isn't a universal opinion, I assure you. Many people love Skyward Sword. It isn't my personal favorite, but it's absolutely in my top 5. I know this will rustle some feathers, but I enjoy Skyward Sword a great deal more than I enjoy Breath of the Wild. The motion controls have never really bothered me. The last playthrough I went through, the motion controls needed recalibrating 3 times across the entire game. Joy-Con drift has been a bigger impact on my Zelda experience than the Wii motion controls have ever. To say that Skyward Sword doesn't deserve to be ported or should only be included with other games is just you taking your own personal opinion and projecting it onto everybody else. Lots of people love Skyward Sword and you're gonna have to live with that. The other 2 arguments are, I feel, much more valid. Let's start with the first. The Skyward Sword HD port is barely an improvement over the graphics of the first game and barely anything has changed. It's a lazy port job. When people say this, I can't help but feel like it's been a while since they played the original, or they exclusively play it on emulators with upper-res graphics. I can assure you we have objective facts that prove otherwise. Opinions on art styles and graphics are so subjective that I can't ultimately tell you that you're wrong, but I can give you some on-paper concrete facts. First fact, Skyward Sword HD made the jump from 480p to 1080p. That is as big of a jump as in Twilight Princess and Wind Waker HD. Second, the game runs in 60 frames per second from a previous 30, which is a bigger jump than the 30 frames per second of the Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD ports. And lastly, the textures are being, at the very least, touched up, if not redone. That is literally the game looking different than it used to. Resolution and frame rate are nice, but only change how the game feels and its clarity. The textures being updated means the game quite literally looks different. Hold that thought for a second. We have a quick word from our sponsor and my favorite radio station, Roll Tape.
98.7 Hyrule Radio is proud to have debuted Pia's newest single, Save Me. The reviews are in, and they give nothing but praise to this young talented artist. So if you haven't heard it yet, now is the time to do so. I'm Ace Monkey, and this is 98.7 Hyrule Radio, your local artist station.
You can find a link to 98.7 Hyrule Radio in the description. Now, back to people comparing Skyward Sword HD to Wind Waker HD. I think what people mean to say is that Skyward Sword HD doesn't have a filter slapped over it like Wind Waker does. And like, so what? Neither did the Twilight Princess port. Did you complain about that? The game is called Skyward Sword HD and it's running in high definition. Wind Waker got a new lighting engine because it's old enough to need one. GameCube Wind Waker still looks great, but the lighting jump from even GameCube Wind Waker to GameCube Twilight Princess was pretty big. Twilight Princess and onward, the lighting was good enough that there was no reason to redo it. There is no reason for them to pointlessly add a filter to a game that doesn't need it. And as for the game being a lazy port, that's a baffling opinion too. The fact that they're updating the textures alone puts that into question. Not to mention the fact that they're making the game playable without motion controls entirely. I've seen people say that adapting the game to play on a controller doesn't count as a big addition because remapping isn't a lot of work. And it's like, oh, are we judging improvements and additions based on how many man hours they take now? Because I'm happy to go back and retroactively apply that standard to the previous remasters. Like I constantly see people comparing the changes in Skyward Sword to the changes in Wind Waker HD. But think about it, do you honestly think that adding in a sail that goes faster was really that much work? Like I see this particular change referenced all the time, but if we're using the bizarre standard of judging it by man hours, do you really think that changing a couple variables in the programming and mapping it to a new model is really that much work? Or let's take a look at Twilight Princess HD. One of the biggest changes in the game was the addition of the Miiverse stamps. And you know what? I bet a ton of man hours were put into that feature. Each stamp had to be drawn, each treasure chest containing them had to be put into a tricky place so they felt like rewards, and the Miiverse functionality had to be programmed in. I bet that took a hefty chunk of time. And you know what? It was a bad addition when the game released, and it's an even worse addition now that Miiverse is shut down. I dread replaying Twilight Princess HD now because whenever I see a treasure chest, I never know if it's going to be something useful or a stamp. So even changes that took a long time to complete can be absolutely awful. Judging changes in the HD port by the amount of man hours needed to finish them is a bafflingly stupid idea to begin with. That's not to say that the increased sailing speed is a bad addition by any means, it was sorely needed, which is exactly how changes should be judged. And that's why I think adding an option to play with the controller is a fantastic addition regardless of how long it took some poor programmer or artist to finish. I had no issues with the motion controls, but plenty of other people did, and now they can enjoy the game without it. A lazy port would have been Nintendo releasing the game basically as is, at 720p 30 frames, and just restricting the game to docked or tabletop play only. I still can't get over how ridiculous the idea of judging changes by how long they take to program is. Anyways, for the second point, the idea that the game is overpriced, honestly I agree. I think all of Nintendo's ports are overpriced. The exceptions are the 3DS ones, which I honestly consider to just be remakes, considering that the textures and many of the models were completely redone. But Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess HD both were absolutely overpriced. I have a video going pretty in depth as to why I think that's the case. And I do think that is the case for Skyward Sword HD as well. It should be like $10, $15 cheaper than the full priced game. No argument here. I just wonder what people expected. Like, why did you think that Skyward Sword HD was going to be cheaper than all of the other ports Nintendo has released on the Switch? Because it's a Wii game? That's a bad reason, considering the distance between Skyward Sword HD and original Skyward Sword is 2 consoles, just like the difference between the Wii U ports and their original games. GameCube to Wii U is a 2-console jump, and so is Wii to Switch. And since the Wii U HD versions were full price when they were released, at least in Canada, why would Nintendo arbitrarily release Skyward Sword for cheaper? They should all be cheaper, that's for sure, but there's no reason for Skyward Sword specifically to be cheaper on launch day. That's why takes like this annoy me so much. Like, yeah, the original is $20, and at the time of release of the Wii U HD ports, I could easily get a hold of either of the GameCube games on eBay for just as much. Buy the original if you only want to spend 20 bucks. I don't know, while I do agree wholeheartedly that the HD versions are overpriced, it just seems like Skyward Sword is being singled out as especially egregious for reasons that just don't make any sense to me at all. And that's pretty much my thoughts on the matter. I'm very excited for the port, I love Skyward Sword, and I can't wait to be able to play it on my Switch. The game might not have a totally new lighting engine, but it doesn't need one. The changes it does have are very welcome, and at least it doesn't have anything as egregious as the Twilight Princess HD stamps. Yes, it's overpriced, but all of the HD versions are overpriced. Skyward Sword isn't especially so. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Do you think that Skyward Sword HD is a lazy, overpriced, no good port, or are you excited for it? Let me know in the comments down below. And as always, thanks for watching. Stay safe out there. The land below is dangerous, but you'll have Fi by your side because it's dangerous to go alone.